Hey again there, everybody. It's Carpo here. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit this morning about a show I watched on Joe Rogan. It was a wonderful interview with I believe he's a physicist, perhaps, or I'm not even sure of his actual credentials. I believe he's 87 years old, and he's a really well-spoken guy. I'll mention it when I talk about that. But during that discussion, a lot of it was about consciousness as well as the universe. And scientific dogma came up a lot, and the idea that he talked about publishing some of his papers and how him and another colleague had published these papers on their some of their explanations or their theories on dark matter or the birth or universe or time, whatever it might have been, and how neither one of them got any responses. And part of the discussion was regarding how in science it is so dogmatic that it's actually any scientist who has a theory already made is afraid to peek at any other theories that may conflict with what he believes to be true. And we know that over 90% of what we believe the universe is made of is dark matter, let's say, and dark energy, and these don't explain anything. Well, this video isn't about that. It's rather about the exact comparison to something else that I wanted to talk about, which was history, the scientific dogma of history. And it's pretty absurd. I want to start by talking about the Greenland Crater, which was recently discovered. There were some people up in Greenland, and they can do ground-based imaging radar. And you can, these days they have the ability to see through the ice sheets, if you will, and they can find thicker material, and so they can map the ground underneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Well, recently up in Greenland, they declared that they had discovered a crater, and this crater was not a small crater. This is 1,000 feet deep, I believe, and 19 miles wide. And that's a big frickin' crater. So, here's where it gets interesting. They believe that this crater is in such perfect condition, according to how, it's obviously an impact crater. And the theory is that it could be anywhere between 2 million years old and 11,700 years old, which would make the impact right at the time of the Younger Dryas period, or the last glacial ice age. The time that so many alternative historians have been talking about for decades. I mean, I started reading this stuff back in the 90s, and I've been fascinated with Egyptology, UFOs, aliens, all that. Of course, I got into all the weird, mysterious stuff, but the down-to-earth stuff, where did these pyramids come from? I'm much more interested in looking at a pyramid and saying, wow, how was that created, than wondering about UFOs or something I have personally never experienced. So, more of a down-to-earth understanding. It comes back to that old idea that, do we need woo-woo in our lives when there's enough craziness right here in reality? That reality is pretty wild, and that our history is completely unknown. So anyhow, back to the impact crater. Judging by the perfect condition of this crater, they say that with the scouring effect of ice sheets over history, if it was millions of years old, it would probably be much more destroyed. But it's in perfect shape. So their belief is that sometime around 12,000 years ago, a large iron meteorite struck, or large iron meteor, becomes a meteorite later, struck where Greenland is now, and has since been covered up by ice for so long that we weren't aware of it. And that this may explain exactly what happened to an advanced race or an advanced species of human that may have existed before 10,000 years ago. Now, the minute you bring that up, people start rolling their eyes, and we get into that idea that, well, and this is something I've thought about a lot, is that why are people so afraid to admit that there may be a possibility that advanced races lived on Earth before us that were very highly advanced? And I think it comes down to lack of evidence even though we have these obvious, beautifully cut blocks in Göbekli Tepe and the Pyramid of Giza, pyramids found around the world in various locations, Colombia, Venezuela, Africa, China, and many of them are built very similar. And of course, one might think, well, that's just, what people would build. Well, it comes down to how are these blocks cut so perfectly? And so, historically, what we've done is we've just ignored anything that we don't understand. And so they show you a picture in the history book of these copper saws, little 2-foot copper saws that they're cutting through these stones with. Well, they completely ignored the scientific method on this by not being able to actually reproduce or show how it was done. So a few years back, there was a group of people, Egyptologists, who actually tried to cut and assembled a few stones together as the Egyptians did. Let's just say that they completely failed. If they went by those methods, they would, it would take endless time to build these things, but it's not about the time it took to build it. It's about the perfection of the assembly. What type of technology would it take to do something like that? And when we talk about, well, why aren't there any tools found in ancient Egypt? Well, if it was built, 5,000 years ago, then there would probably be some tools left over. If it was built, let's say, 20,000 years ago, anything metallic would have been long since destroyed, right? I don't know the answers to all these things, and I know I'm getting off track with the Egypt thing. It's because that was the first time I realized just how biased science was when I was studying ancient Egypt and some of these things. The idea that they still think that it's Khufu's tomb, that a pyramid was built for Khufu's tomb. But the only evidence that they have for that is graffiti in an upper chamber that was found that said, with Khufu's name. It wasn't even written nicely. It's pretty absurd. And watching it unfold, I could only think, well, eventually we're going to find some indisputable evidence. And the more evidence that we find that these structures are so complex and were engineered perfectly, the more we just tend to ignore it. And anybody who's any alternative Egyptologists are just, cast off as, oh yeah, well, they're just aliens, must have been aliens, But there are some serious questions that need to be asked about this. So, the same exact thing has happened with, as far as when the more evidence that comes forward that something just doesn't make sense. It seems like the more we ignore it instead of taking it to heart. And in this case, we have scientists that say, look, we've discovered a crater. By the erosion, by the age, it looks like it could have caused the Younger Dryas or had something to do with a major worldwide cataclysm 12,000 years ago. For those who don't study these things, it doesn't seem like, it's just another scientific debate or argument. To people who have been looking at ancient history, a person like myself who's been reading these things for the past 25, 30 years, to have the evidence, the smoking gun, presented right in front of us, I'm just curious to see, will we run with it? Will it even matter? Because so far, people have been, scientific community has not taken it seriously, and they don't want to. And here's what I'm trying to get across. As a scientifically minded person myself who loves to make discoveries, I would never rely on my, I should say I would never dismiss somebody else just to keep my ego fed. We want our theories to be correct, but it seems that the more theories we have, the more we're wrapped up, and the more we believe what we believe, the less likely we are to listen to someone else. And this is dangerous in science, especially when it's something as mundane as a potential impact. Because mainstream scientists were saying, no, it wasn't an impact. There was probably an air burst of a comet or something that caused wildfires. And the other, groups are saying, no, there were no wildfires. And where did the Clovis people go? And some people say, oh, they didn't go anywhere. They didn't die out. And others say, well, there was an advanced race that died out. And all through this, we once again, don't have any real evidence for it. But why are we so afraid to, I guess what I'm saying is, why aren't more people jumping on this and saying, okay, now we have some actual evidence. Let's go with it. Let's see what we can learn about it. Anytime a new discovery is made which defends an alternative viewpoint or a viewpoint that isn't extremely mainstream in science, it's completely disregarded, thrown out, and ignored. And I find that is just a very sad state of affairs. And that's why as usual, I don't, you know, there's dogma in science, there's groupthink, but there's dogma in the alternative viewpoints too. I'm not going to let them get away scot-free, you know, the whole ancient aliens thing, and I fell for a lot of this stuff. I was really into this. I want some of this stuff to be true, because the woo-woo is attractive. It brings us in. It's exciting. If we think, ooh, we can throw the word quantum in here and try to understand how these things work. The same pride and being stuck in your ways happens with the alternative community. In other words, they will dismiss mainstream science as the enemy, and they won't even use any of their theories or ideas. So it becomes a battle of wits, but a battle of ego. A battle of who can prove that they're right first, rather than all of us being right. And the whole idea is, if you make a discovery, sure, if you want recognition, so be it, but I'd like to see people coming together to share information for the betterment of all. And as far as my own theories on this, I don't know. I haven't seen the crater. I've only seen pictures, radar images. I really don't know much. I'm not a geologist. We can only go by what the experts say, and it's not even that big of a deal. It's nothing that it's pretty much what a lot of people expected to find. I mean, what's the big deal? You know, a meteor hit. People died out. Big surprise. I think where it gets confusing is when people say, is there a possibility that a very advanced civilization could have died out 12,000 years ago? And it's hard for us to even look back. I mean, looking back millions or billions of years, it's not within our comprehension to really understand that. We try. We pretend like we do, and we have our own views of what a billion years is. But when you really compare it and write it down and write a billion dots out, or, you know, see the actual size, it's just mind-blowing. And when we're talking about even thousands, it's hard for us to understand that 2,000 years ago, when, like at the end of the Egyptian, let's just put it this way, at the end of the Egyptian, there were several different, you know, lineages and in ancient Egypt, but Egypt itself, from today, I should say from the time the Egypt Empire ended until today, is less time than they existed in total, meaning extended back thousands of years. But still, in the big picture, even if it went back 4,000 years BC, that's still only 6,000 years. That's only half of the distance between here and when this supposed impact took place. And the question a lot of people have is, what happened in that period? Our belief is that 12,000 years ago, people started to learn how to farm. And we started to, you know, we held animals, we had seeds, we started to understand how the world worked. But are we really to believe that it took us that long to figure it out? Or is it possible that maybe there was a cataclysm that set us back a little ways? And I've always had this idea, why haven't we found any tools or any evidence of this? Well, when I found out what my city would look like in 1,000 years from now, I mean, I guess it only takes, you know, 1,000 years for all the metal to, you know, corrode and die out. Even plastics in a couple thousand years are completely gone. And so when we look at it in that scale, we can wonder, was there something greater here before? It's fun to think about. It gives some interesting thoughts to the arcs, the stories of the Ark, the stories of, you know, we've always believed that there was a lot of us, that there was a major cataclysm in history where some history was lost, and that some of that history was preserved, and that we're looking for it, if you will. Some people have proposed that it's underneath the Sphinx in a vault, that this is what they call the Akashic records, and some people have taken that into a kind of a spiritual woo-woo realm where the Akasha is something you tap into, or some spiritual awareness of the universe, which maybe anything's possible. It's just that we have to remember to keep our feet grounded when we're talking about subjects of history, because we just don't know. And the stories I've heard from scientists aren't any better than the ones I've heard from the, you know, the extreme woo-woo people. So I fell for the woo for a while, and I shifted away into more technical aspects, and I found myself back in the middle. I'm balancing my views. I'm looking at things to where I'm not attached to any one idea. And that's the most useful way I've found to understand the universe around me. It's because then when somebody comes up with a better idea, I'm like, oh, okay, let's check that out, see if it works. Instead of no. You know, I know what's best. Because I don't. I'm one human. I have many theories that change over time, and really I don't know shit. You know, I've spent 43 years on this earth. You know, humanity's history is much more intelligent than I could ever be. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. History is not what we're told, but it's not always our fault. Because there is a reason we want to believe that we are the first. We want to believe that we're the chosen ones, or that we were the first species to attain this. It's to the point where we don't want to believe that anyone could have been that intelligent in the past. We'd rather ignore it. But I think that some people feel the same way about aliens, and they feel the same way about you know, the idea that anything could be more advanced than us. It's our desire to think that we're really on the top of the food chain, and I don't think we are. But you know, I don't know. I don't think it's really disempowering to realize that you're just energy like everything else. It's empowering, but what is the capability of the human mind? I don't know. I have to go. I'm going to end up rambling too long on this one. I'm going to get to my next video because I have something else to talk about.